The Pentagon has now released videos showing the so-called mother of all bombs being dropped in Afghanistan. The Afghan Defense Ministry says 36 ISIS fighters were killed, but no civilians. The U.S. commander in Afghanistan was given full authority to use the weapon. He says he did it so Afghan troops and their American advisors wouldn't have to clear out the area. Meanwhile, at the White House yesterday, President Trump was unclear about whether or not he authorized a strike himself.
Everybody knows exactly what happened, and what I do is I authorize my military. We have the greatest military in the world, and they've done a job as usual. So we have given them total authorization, and that's what they're doing. And frankly, that's why they've been so successful lately. If you look at what's happened over the last 8 weeks and compare really to what's happened over the last 8 years, you'll see there's a tremendous difference, So we have incredible leaders in the military, and we have incredible military, and we are very proud of them, and this was another very, very successful mission.
Let's bring in Eliza Collins. She's a congressional reporter for USA Today, and she joins me now from Washington. Good to see you, Eliza.
Good to be here.
So let's begin with those remarks from the president yesterday, specifically that comment about giving the military, quote, total authorization. What sort of reaction is that getting there in D.C.?
I think you're going to see like the mainstream Republicans who have been a little bit concerned and confused about the president's foreign policy. I think there's a sigh of relief. Trump's defense cabinet is pretty well stocked. Those are some of the only people that weren't very controversial. And so you're seeing a lot of those like establishment Republicans saying, okay, great, these are generals, they know what they're doing, they have experience, this is not subject to Trump's sort of up and down decisions on the military. You are seeing the more conservative or populist Republicans are frustrated. They feel like the president kind of went away from what he promised, this America first. This is not an America first. This is definitely a more globalist mentality. And of course, you're seeing Democrats who want a seat at the table, want more information about, Trump's foreign policy plan. We saw them last week with Syria. They were frustrated about him not giving kind of a heads up and a plan moving forward. And that's just going to continue. They're not happy that he's now kind of off-sourcing this, but I do think there's some relief, even from Democrats, that these are generals handling it, and not Trump and his White House, who don't have a lot of foreign policy experience.
The other concern I think that legislators and lawmakers have had is, and I want to know what your reporting has revealed, is that the Trump cabinet is stocked with a lot of people with military experience. Specifically, I'm talking about, of course, James Mattis and H.R. McMaster. But that he hasn't filled other roles that sometimes serve as checks and balances on the military. And when the president makes a comment that he says he's authorized the military to authorize the use of weapons or other, that I think is sort of what many people might be worried about. What is your reporting saying on that?
I think there's not a ton of information about that yet, but you're exactly right. The checks and balances are crucial. And like I was saying before, about Democrats saying that they want assessment going forward, and that plays into it. They want checks and balances. They're relieved that there are people who know what they're doing in these roles, but also a group of generals are going to be a little bit more, say, other people with checks and balances. But it's also a catch-22. These Democrats have to be able to confirm these people, especially in the Senate. So if they get too critical, you'll see Republicans push back and say, okay, make this process easier to get them through then.
All of this is unfolding, Eliza, as you know, as lawmakers are back home in their districts on recess, and they are once again facing some brutal town hall crowds. Take a look at what Republican Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona encountered last night, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
Mr. Flake, why is it that in Germany we have had a universal health care system since... Wait a minute. Since 1871.
I don't happen to agree. I think the free market system...
we should give credit, obviously, to Senator Flake for actually standing in the line of fire and being held accountable to his constituents like that, because a lot of other members of Congress and the Senate are not doing that. But what's going on across the country right now when it comes to how people are feeling, especially when they are confronting their legislators?
Well, I think that's exactly right. Jeff Flake is actually in an anomaly right now, facing these angry crowds in town halls, especially right after this failed Obamacare vote. Of course, it was in the House, not the Senate, but Republicans are all tied together at this point. So he is unique, and we do have to give him credit because he knew going into this that it was going to be a rowdy crowd. He told the Arizona Republic before, I don't think I'm going to be able to change many minds, but it's important to do this. Jeff Flake also faces a really tough 2018 re-election campaign. He's ranked up in those top 3 for most vulnerable, so he needs to be out there to do this. But another thing that's important to note is Mesa, Arizona, I'm from Arizona, is definitely a more conservative part of the state. So the fact that all of these people are showing up and upset with Flake does say something. That being said, this was definitely organized, or at least encouraged. The Democratic National Committee was sending out emails before. There's a sort of movement right now. Democrats are upset. They have found health care is the Affordable Care Act is pretty popular right now, so they're able to kind of glom onto that and say, go tell Senator Flake that you like your health care. So there's a mix of being organized movements across the country, and then also just Republicans have to go face their constituents, and they're in a tough spot because they're coming out of this failed repeal vote at a time when Obamacare is at an all-time popularity.
And yeah, you've been traveling around North Carolina this week with the Freedom Caucus and along with Chairman Mark Meadows. What's been the reaction from their visits to their folks?
So that's actually been a completely different side of the story. So it's good to note that while facing these town halls, there are definitely some angry constituents. I went with Congressman Mark Meadows, who's chair of the Freedom Caucus, super conservative. There's about 36 of them, and they were critical in the failure of the bill last month. So I spent 2 days with him. He did not do any large town halls, so he can't speak to what a full crowd would say. But I did talk to some Democrats and some Republicans. It was really interesting. They all kind of just had faith that he was going to represent their district. It's a very conservative area. It's R+14, which means it's really Republican. But they didn't quite understand what he was doing. But I would ask, are you okay that he stopped this repeal? And do you like Obamacare? They want Obamacare repealed, and they're okay that he stopped it because they sort of just have faith that he understands the district, and that's because he's super hyper-local. He's the kind of guy that will call. He heard someone was sick, and so he called. He checked in when someone had a baby, and so these people know him on a personal level, so they trust what he's doing in Washington. So that's a completely different side of the coin than what Senator Flake was facing.
Really interesting reporting, fascinating insights. Eliza Collins of USA Today.